Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so we'll get started. First off, thanks everybody for joining me here today. My name is Wes Wolfe. I'm an assistant coach with the Erie Otters in the Ontario Hockey League. I've been with the team since 2016-17. We were really fortunate to win an OHL championship that season, and lots of great memories from that, and had the opportunity to coach a lot of great players in those few years that I've been with the team. So I thought, given what we're all going through, this would be a good opportunity to share. And this will be the first of several presentations that I intend on having offered to the public for free. And that's in conjunction with the Niagara Hockey Coaches Seminar, which I co-founded alongside Murray Nystrom, who many of you may know as the head coach at the just closed University of Lethbridge men's hockey program. Along with two other gentlemen, Greg Capillero and Wayne Chapman. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, but there are going to be more presenters with lots of great topics, and hopefully there's some value and you guys can take something away from it. But without further ado, I'm going to share my presentation now on the anatomy of a breakout season. And just to give some background on this particular topic, what we're going to look at is three different areas. One is traditional coaching and evaluation, which I would assume everyone on this call is pretty familiar with. And then what we're also going to do is look at performance data, otherwise known as hockey analytics, and then finally behavioral analytics. And the breakout season that we're going to use as our case study is Max Goal out of the Erie Otters. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this presentation isn't possible without Max and his permission and sharing some of this information. And on top of that, for all the hard work that he's put in. So Max this season had a breakout year, was able to get 78 points in 63 games and saw a dramatic increase in production. He's a 13th round draft pick, and he's seen steady development and growth over his 3 years with our team. And so the area I'm going to spend the least amount of time on is traditional evaluation and coaching. And I think this is something that we all try to do on an everyday basis, and that's use our own observation skills and feedback to try and help our players develop and use video and all the tools we have at our fingertips to help them become better hockey players. But what we're going to look at in particular with Max is what did some NHL scouts say about him following the 18-19 season, and then compare their comments to some video examples, and then briefly look at a few examples of some changes that Max made in his game. And there's a whole other presentation to be done on the nuts and bolts of drills and development. That's not really the direction I wanted to take with this, but we'll proceed. So this is just an unsolicited profile, basically, of quotes from different scouts around the NHL that I talked to about Max. And this is what they said about him to get a picture of Max as a hockey player. Like the skating and puck skills, don't like the hockey sense and lack of offensive structure. Some seem to like the compete and some don't in consistency game to game, and I bolded that. When he isn't scoring, what is his backup game? So as a player with 35 points, his production numbers are average. So if he doesn't meet the threshold of the highest production, what separates him? Intriguing skill set, assuming he continues to add needed size and strength. Not the biggest kid, but can be noticeably strong on the puck, down low. Shows good hands in close, which should improve with more strength. And then finally, there must be an improvement in his own end. He got better as the season went on, but this is still a work in progress. I'd like to see him win more puck battles on the wall. So here's just some video evidence, and Max will be circled so you can see who he is in these clips, and some examples of what they're talking about. So this first clip is Max on a track, does a tremendous job, working above, great effort, getting inside body position, creating a turnover, and we're back the other way. Versus, and this is the consistency, the puck is turned over, and then you see a stick in the air, not working back, and he's late to react, which ends in an odd man rush. Again, getting it on the forecheck, here's where you see some strength in the wall and battles that was alluded to. getting inside body position, working hard, competing for pucks, and then ending up with possession. Versus this clip where he's going to turn over the puck, then rather than stop and engage, he continues to circle to the point where he's out of the picture and unable to help support in the battle. And then the final clips here are defensive zone, return to D zone, no stop, gives up a scoring chance. Same thing in this clip. He's going to circle outside of where he should have stopped and is caused to be desperate with his stick. And then just this last clip. Again, it's a return to D zone. And this is some of that detail and consistency that was probably lacking in his game most. And so as a coach, these are the clips that we would want to show as teaching clips, along with some positive reinforcement of good things. But I would say this is one of the areas that Max improved the most. And that was just through, like I said, hard work and attention to detail, and something that he took a lot more pride in 2019-20. So here are some clips of the Max that we would see on a more regular basis, and a lot more like some of the positive clips we saw from the previous year. Here he is with his stick on the ice, staying engaged. This one is an offensive zone clip, but again, you're really going to see his compete and strengthen the puck despite the size advantage he gives up. He's able to get inside defenders' hands, and his persistence and detail and effort on the puck is something that he showed night in, night out, and I think was a big part of why he was able to break out. And so there are just a few more clips here that we're going to look at. This one, obviously, coaches love to see players working above the puck, making sure that they're on the defensive side, creating turnovers, and a few more effort clips. Here he is on a track, getting inside, good stick lift, creating some separation there. Then these last few clips are the D zone. And this is something that Max took a lot more pride in. And I think, at the end of the day, when scouts talk about backup game, or a coach refers to a backup game, when he wasn't producing, this is what the expectation should be at all times. And so here he is returning to D zone, stick on the ice. He's able to break up an odd man rush. And here he is, F1 back into the zone. Rather than turning away, he stops. He's able to recover the loose puck. And then last clip here, love the detail. Stick on the ice. He's looking where his man is. The play is made. He's able to get a stick on it, cause some disruption. And sometimes detail and hard work ends up with a stick in the face. Really, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that's always going to be a part of the player development process as a coach. And something certainly that you want to make sure that you're detailed and arming your players with what they need. And now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this presentation. And really, that's how we incorporate data into the player development process from an analytics standpoint, and then later on behavior. But we'll start with performance analytics. What we're going to look at is information provided by Stathletes. They're a third party that we work with. The data specifically is going to be 5-on-5 player profile data from 2018-19 of Max against some of his NHL drafted peers, same age from the OHL. And then we're going to compare his profile from 18-19 to 19-20. Among many things that Stathletes does for us from a team standpoint, what we receive from them from an individual standpoint are player profiles on a quarterly basis and a year-end basis that have 63 individual metrics in 4 categories: possession, shooting, passing, and defensive grit metrics. And if you're anything like me or the other coaches that I've talked to, sometimes this information can be really overwhelming. You have graphs and numbers and all this information on page after page that can be really hard to dissect and take anything meaningful from. And so what we try to do with the individual player development profile is break it down into bite-size and manageable pieces that directly correlate to a player's identity and can help them improve. And so we're going to look at 12 different metrics for Max in 3 different categories. not only to give you a snapshot of who he is as a player or who he was as a player, but also target specific areas of need. And so the first four are based off of his possession stats. And they're very simple and easy to digest, but they're the total possession time per game, ozone shot recoveries per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time, possession gains leading to shot attempts, and controlled zone entry rate. And this is an area, despite even in 18-19, his average offensive production, Max is a superstar. He's an elite category. You look compared to some of his NHL drafted peers from the OHL from the same year, he far outshines them in this area. He was, in the top 20 in total possession time and top 20 in possession gains leading to shot attempts. His ozone shot recoveries, through the roof compared to an OHL average forward and some of those drafted peers. And so when it comes to development, this is not an area that we would necessarily specifically target. I think organically, as he evolves as a player, these things will evolve and naturally get better. This is who he is, and we wouldn't really want to focus too much time on this. I think the focus is more on some of the outcomes as a result of this, and we're going to take a look a little bit further in that. But he's already an elite player from 18-19, what we look at in terms of possession stats. And this is where we now start to zero in on some of the specific areas of need. And that's starting with his defensive and grit data. On the left side, steals and interceptions, takeaways, and physical counts, again, places Max in what we would consider elite category, top 20, top 30 in the league, at getting the puck back or being involved in battles. He's certainly really involved in the game in that standpoint. But when we contrast it with some of the information on the right, that's where we can start to focus on areas that he'll need to improve and how we can specifically target those when it comes to player development. And number one is the number of turnovers created in the forecheck. And you saw in the improvements from clip to clip that I showed, Max was a lot more persistent, but in the first season, he wasn't necessarily as consistent in creating turnovers on the forecheck. For a guy who was able to get the puck back in other areas of the ice, I think he was relying a lot on teammates to do the work for him. And then probably most troubling is the number of giveaways. So for all of the takeaways per 60, 23.9, he was giving it away 24.8 times. So he was giving the puck away more than he was getting it. And that actually placed him 242nd out of 268 forwards in the OHL. And that's pretty dangerous when you start to consider you can break into where his giveaways were occurring and what types of things were happening after his giveaways. And so data is just data until you can turn it into actionable information. And so when we target those areas based on what the objective information is telling us, we can zero in and refer back to the video and look at some of those things and then help develop a roadmap for the player on how to improve. So here are some clips from 18-19. Again, Max is circled. You see the possession with control entering the offensive zone, gets below the goal line, but then throws a blind play to the middle of the ice. Same thing here, getting separation, coming through the neutral zone, not protecting the puck, leading to a turnover. Same thing here, controlled zone entry, lazy play or soft play into the middle of the ice. Offensive zone possession, right? Rather than make a simple play low to high, tries to force something through coverage, right? So those are the types of clips, again, that we would want to look at from the data and the information to target those areas. And then the very last thing that we're going to look at is his shooting data from 18-19. And again, it's a tale of two different players. So on the left side, you take a look at his personal shot attempts per 60 minutes and his shot attempts from home plate. Again, pretty proficient. Home plate specifically, what we would determine as the most dangerous scoring area immediately in front of the net. Max actually was able to generate a lot of shot attempts from that area, which I think is the first question mark that you would really start to raise. Well, how does a player who is in the top 40 in shots from home plate only end up with 17 goals and 35 points? And I think when you start to look at more of the data, it starts to give you a more accurate depiction of what's happening. And so the first one is his one-timer percentage. And when you compare him to a fifth-round NHL pick from our league, who was the same age, he was one-timing pucks twice as much as Max was, and coincidentally had twice as many goals in his draft year. So that might be something specifically where we're looking at, why isn't he one-timing the puck? Is it something that he's comfortable with? Is he able to take a one-timer, or is he handling the puck too much? Why is he not one-timing it, and is that something that could translate to more offense? And then the last in this bottom right quadrant here is scoring ability. And this is a metric that was developed by Stathletes based on their expected goals model, and it takes into account a number of different parameters as it relates to a shot attempt. Was it off the rush? Was there traffic? Was it a one-timer? Was it on a player's backhand? Was the goalie moving? Were his feet set? And all of the historical data based on every shot attempt taken previous to that, it affects the expected goal model and assigns a value to the shot attempt. And so looking at Max's expected goals versus his actual production, he ranked 265th out of 268 forwards, and actually was producing far less than what was expected based on what he was generating. And you look at his shots from home plate and his personal shot attempts, it starts to beg the question, why? And so here's some video examples from 18-19 of Max in scoring areas and either not being prepared or a couple other things. So number one is he's in home plate and he's backing away, not in a ready position to shoot the puck. Similar clip. This is 5-on-5. He's on the edge of home plate, not ready. Another one, driving the net here off the rush. Okay, taking it into home plate, passing off an opportunity to shoot the puck. Getting into home plate, and this was something through video review we found a lot of, was Max was trying to be too cute, and he was just finishing soft, 5-hole, along the ice, not shooting the puck, or on his shot attempts. You know, in this clip right here, there's two animations. Gets the puck, there's a lot of net to shoot at, but rather than, you know, catching and releasing or one-timing pucks, he wants to finish too cute around the net. And, you know, there's also an element of luck. You know, you have to look at some of those scoring chances and say, you know, was he unlucky around the net? Or does he need to develop his shot? Does he need to develop more awareness around the net, or just bear down? And so here we're going to review what the data tells us. And this is kind of what we've talked about. But based on his possession stats, he's among elite company in the league, certainly above his peers who were drafted. He generates lots of scoring chances in the dangerous areas, but has a hard time finishing them off. Is it luck? Is it skill? Is it both? He shows promise in his defensive metrics, his takeaways, his steals, the number of battles he's involved in, but he's inconsistent. And so the data is aligning with what scouts are saying, what our eye test says. And the question is, how do we turn all of this data into development? And the way that we turn data into action, number one, is by having an honest discussion, and, you know, extrapolating some of that information into an actual plan. And so we can identify areas of improvement for development during skills and practice by combining the eye test, the video, and the data that we have. Because what it does is it reveals something that maybe we didn't see before, or we can look further into. And then you refer to the video and you teach, and you can use the information as an extra layer to communicate. And I put caution in brackets because this is something that we're going to get to later. You don't want to have an overload of information. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, as we mentioned. And so what I kind of broke it down to is the 4 Ps. Based on the information and the data you have, you create an action plan. And the plan, from there you proceed. And hopefully you see some progress. It could be positive. It could be negative. Whatever the case is, you need to pivot based on the results that you get, and then look at your information and start to plan again. And so that's kind of our 4P process: is we plan, we proceed, we progress, we pivot, and then we plan again. And it's a continuous cycle. And so when we compare, you know, based on the plan that we had, Max actually showed an improvement in 20 of his 23 possession metrics, where we already deemed him to be an elite category. And so when it comes to creating a development plan for each individual player, the areas that are strengths aren't always necessarily something you want to key in on. That's already something they're good at. Of course, you want to continue to work on what you're good at, But I think organically, when you talk about your backup game, there's other areas of your game that you can improve that will probably lead to improvement to what you're already good at. And so Max showed significant growth in the specific highlighted areas for development that we looked at. And in 63 metrics overall, he improved in 41 of them. And so the first two, turnovers created on forecheck, he increased by 3. And I thought, the first video that I showed of his improvements really showed some of that. And that was more just attention to detail, stick position or compete or body position. Just that detail and that subtle shift and emphasis helped create more turnovers. And probably most remarkably are his giveaways per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time decreased from 24.8 to 14.6. That's a difference of 10. So, 60 minutes of 5-on-5 ice is probably 5 or 6 games of ice time. That's pretty significant. If you're giving the puck away 2 less times per game, you can imagine what more productive things you could be doing with the puck. And you're not forced to defend. You're going to be on offense a lot more. And when you combine that with more turnovers created, I think ultimately it's going to lead to more production. And so that's what we're looking at, is how a player was able to break out offensively. The skills and habits that we were able to help Max improve in and create a backup game led to improved offensive production, from 17 goals to 25 and from 35 points to 78. And so the last two areas, his one-timer percentage increased by 2.5%, and his scoring ability, his actual conversion of scoring chances actually went from negative to positive. He produced a little bit more than what he was expected to produce, but you saw that increase in 43 points. And I think this video really shows some of the focus that Max was able to put into that area. So here he is, similar clip, offensive zone, one time in the puck instead of looking to pass it off. Here's another one. He's in the scoring area, right? He's able to get himself open, ready to shoot right away. And this is something that we really focused on in skills, and something that you refer back to video. This is power play goal, but gives the idea of what we're looking at here. He was much more ready to score goals. He had a better shot mentality off the rush. Instead of looking to pass up, he's looking to shoot the puck, right? And then instead of finishing cute at the net, looking to go 5-hole all the time, going upstairs, bearing down, driving the net hard, or off the rush. Instead of looking to pass it off, letting his shot go. And so when you combine some of that information with actual skill development and a plan, you can see real tangible results. And so for practical application, I know there are a number of different people on this call with really diverse backgrounds. For coaches specifically, there are a number of third parties that you can use. Statspace, or Stats Track, Iceberg, Rubber Biscuits, Instat, iTrack. There are all kinds of different apps and companies that are putting out all kinds of really interesting and useful information. And so you can investigate what works for you. And if you don't have the resources, because I know there are minor hockey coaches on this call, decide on what's important to you and your team. And you can have a team manager or one of your engaged parents manually track it. And what I mean by that is you don't need 63 individual metrics. It's time consuming and it's costly, and there's a lot of effort that goes into it. So decide on what is important to you based on your own observation, or how you want your team to play, or how you want your players to improve, and focus on those. If it's controlled entries, or if it is shot attempts from home plate, or if it's plays made in the offensive zone, focus on 3 or 4 things at different times of the season and track them to help give an accurate depiction of what your players need from a development standpoint. And then there's always lots of people looking to break into the industry. Take on a student volunteer from a college or university. This is something that is near and dear to my heart. As someone with a non-traditional playing background, I think there's lots of people out there who are thirsty for opportunity. And I think if that's something you can provide, by all means, I would encourage you to do that. And then finally, find some resources online and learn more about it. There are lots of great books on hockey analytics, or in baseball, how different teams have been able to incorporate both data and traditional coaching methods into their philosophies. And so learn more and decide what's useful for you. And the last area that we're going to look at here is behavioral analytics. And this subcategory, we're going to look at ways to communicate with players based on information that we get provided by a third party called Core 5 Analytics. Essentially, what happens is our players take two different assessments that will give us a better understanding of their behavior, their motivating factors, ways to communicate with them, emotional intelligence. And so we're going to utilize assessment data from behavioral science to understand how and why of a player's actions. And then from there, try and learn how to adapt coaching methods to players' behavior style and communication preferences and motivating factors and values. And most importantly, increase our own self-awareness as coaches and help players increase their self-awareness to provide them with a strategy to improve issues that will ultimately short-circuit their careers down the road. And I think a lot of this plays into coaching the Gen Z athlete. You know, your athletes today from Generation Z all crave an individual experience. You know, everything from how they communicate, Snapchat or Instagram, it's all tailored to a very individual society and a very individual experience. And that's something that, you know, even as it comes to athletics, your athletes will need. And so in fairness to Max, I didn't want to reveal any information on him. I don't think that would be fair. So we're going to look at some anonymous examples of players on our team. And so again, with the behavioral analytics profiles that we get on the left, that's kind of a snapshot of an executive summary. But what we really get is a multi-page report that includes where they fall on a behavior wheel, motivators, communication, do's and don'ts, as I mentioned, emotional intelligence, their acumen, certain competencies that they've developed, and then risk attributes that may be detrimental to a team, whether it's compliance or self-regulation, personal accountability, and things of that nature. And again, it can be really, really confusing and overwhelming when you get all this page after page of information. We've been doing it for 5 years with the Otters, and it's something that continues to be an evolving process that I try to get better at. I think we all do, and try and understand. And so the first thing that I want to look at is coaching different personalities. And so when I mentioned behavioral style, this wheel on the right is a DISC assessment. And some of you may have taken this before, but this is really only a portion of the multiple hours it takes to do the assessments that we have with our players. And all the coaches take it as well. And that's really important because, as I mentioned, self-awareness and self-assessment and understanding yourself as a coach is most important. And so when it comes to behavior, myself and this anonymous player that we're going to call player X are actually nearly identical. We fall in the same quadrant of the wheel here, more on the dominant influencer behavioral style. And so oftentimes people who are the same behaviorally will get along and communicate in similar ways. And that really has not been the case with this specific player, or wasn't the case. And conflict was arising between us. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, that there are certain players that you just have a hard time connecting with. And a lot of it had to do with the differences in our underlying motivators. And the motivators are the driving forces behind why we make the decisions that we make, why we do what we do, why we behave the way we do. And on the left side here is a list of all the different motivators that you may have that drive are the driving forces behind why you do what you do. And so number one, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of coaches, I am motivated by selflessness, more of a we-focused person. And this particular player, that's not very high on their motivators, very me-focused, not so concerned about the team necessarily, and more concerned about themselves and how things relate to themselves. And then the second one, I guess this kind of speaks to my inner nerd. If you look at the team average, intellectual motivators is really about continued learning. Obviously I'm an avid reader and I crave information. I'm motivated a lot by this type of motivator. If it's reading books or if it's doing webinars like this, that's something that motivates me. This particular player, not as much. And so, you have to review your practices. If I'm recommending to a player who's struggling with something to go read a book or watch a YouTube video by Lou Holtz, it may not be as effective because they're not motivated by that. They're not going to get better. They're not going to learn that way. And the last area is what would be called resourcefulness, but ultimately it's being motivated by results. And this particular player is very results focused, wants reasons why. I don't want to focus on the process. I don't need to know why it's important for me to do it, all the steps along the way. I just want to know that it's going to make me better, and this is how it's going to make me better right now. And obviously, that's not something that motivates me. And so you have to check yourself and your communication, because if the player isn't understanding the message as you're communicating it, then you're going to clash and there's going to be conflict and you're going to continue to be frustrated. And so if you can build some of that into your individual player development, it's going to resonate a lot more and be a lot more effective. And so I thought I'd share two different players' executive summaries of their behavioral analytics profiles. And so as you see, as I said, this is a multi-page report that we get broken down into one page that has some of the most important do's and don'ts. And so this is player one. They make decisions based on facts and logic. And some of the do's are be prepared with facts and figures, provide solid, tangible, practical evidence, and respect his quiet demeanor. This is someone that, I allude back to earlier when I said be careful with what you share. This is a player that would probably respond really well to sharing some of those performance hockey analytics, because the video may not be enough, or a scout's opinion or a coach's opinion may not be enough. They need objective, tangible information. In terms of behavior, they're an analyzer. And so they need details and standards, constant appreciation. They're probably afraid of making mistakes. You look at some of the other things that motivate them. They need constant appreciation and a feeling of security. And then, this particular player scores really high in a lot of character categories, with the exception of self-regulation. And so he'll probably need help managing anxiety and negative thoughts or emotions. And then lastly, because they're an analyzer, they may need to have things kept simple from time to time because they overthink things. And so again, adapting to what this player needs from a communication standpoint, you may want to be more prepared when it comes to a one-on-one meeting, because they don't want it to be left in a gray area. And where I compare this to player two, you're going to see a stark contrast. It's almost the exact opposite. They don't want, and under the dose, don't drive on to facts and figures. So this particular player, you may not want to use some of that information because it's just going to make them angry and frustrated and confused. They are an influencer in terms of behavior. They want a friendly work environment to be the promoter of programs off the ice. They want a podium to express ideas. A coach, they want a coach that promotes their ability to positively influence others. So this is someone that may need public recognition. When it comes time to do your team video sessions, it may be a really good time to highlight something positive that they've done, to encourage them, to give them feedback. What you do want to do is provide that friendly environment and minimize the risk. They need help staying focused, and they're probably easily distracted. You look at some of their character emotional quotient scores, really low on self-awareness, really low on motivation. So someone who continues to need that public praise, maybe you're going to inflate that sense. So you also want to balance it. They also scored really low on continuous learning. So you're going to need to challenge yourself to figure out ways to communicate and connect with this player. And the last thing that I want to talk about is in the player development process, what we try to do is develop modules for our players to complete in areas that they need for growth. So it may be a self-awareness module, something that they can participate in and grow in, and hopefully bring up some of those emotional quotient scores, but also do it in ways that they're going to learn from it. So it may not be a 2-page assignment for this particular player to learn about self-awareness. It may be doing a presentation for teammates or for students, at a local school, because they want to be promoter of programs that assist others. And so that's kind of how you can help develop those areas. So again, what does this information tell us? Well, number one is using a blanket approach will not work. Everyone receives and interprets information and coaching differently. And so the days of this is how I say to do it, no questions, those are long gone, as we all know. But I think understanding and managing yourself is by far the most important variable affecting performance. A coach needs to understand and manage themselves before they can see and make the necessary changes to match the characteristics of your players. For you to get the most out of them, you need to understand you. And then they need to understand you and where you're coming from. And you need to understand them, where they're coming from. And that's kind of how you try to bridge the communication gap between yourself and people that sometimes you struggle to connect with. And so from a practical application standpoint, people spend all kinds of time on technical and skill development, and it's certainly really important to do that, especially in a competitive environment. You need to develop those skills, but it's the awareness and management of yourself that's the determining factor in success or failure at the end of the day. And that needs to be included as part of your development. If you're going to be short-circuited by some of those things, all the skill development in the world is not going to matter. And the awareness that assessments bring is only practical if it's applicable, and it does what you intend it to do, and it has a measurable impact. And so much like the hockey analytics, data is just data until you can turn it into action. It's the exact same with the data and awareness that you get from these assessments. It's only practical if you can apply it and you invest in what you're doing. You have to learn about these things so that you can communicate with your players and connect with them. And if you don't have access, you don't have the resources, use the power of individual meetings. Ask your players questions. How do you want to be coached? What is something that I can do to get the most out of you? What does it look like when I'm not getting the most out of you? What motivates you? You can ask those questions if you don't have the money or the resources to take part in assessments like this. And then finally, provide opportunities for regularly occurring 360-degree feedback. Again, with Generation Z, they really need a personal experience. They crave individuality. They crave the opportunity to be engaged and invested in their own growth and development. And so if you're not asking questions and you're not getting feedback 360 degrees, it doesn't matter. So when we circle back to the player development process, incorporating traditional coaching, performance data, behavioral analytics, there's one piece that I didn't put at the beginning, and that's the relationships. None of this matters without your individual relationship with your players. And this is actually something that I added to the presentation based on something I saw this week. Brad Larson, the assistant coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, did a tremendous presentation this week with the NHL Coaches Association on not losing your feel, and using data as a tool is important, but you can't lose your feel for the game. You can't lose your feel for the relationships and your people. And I think any good relationship is built on trust and honesty and respect, and that's mutual. You have to trust your players. They have to trust you. You have to be honest with each other, and you have to respect each other. And I think communication ultimately is the foundation for everything. If you don't know how to communicate with your players, or you don't do it regularly, you don't know what's going on in their lives, you're going to have a really hard time connecting. And acting with a player's best interest at heart is something that needs to be at the core of what you're doing, because they know. There's an old quote, and I don't know who you can attribute it to, but people don't care how much you know unless they know that you care. And I think that's certainly the case in coaching. You need to pay attention to small things. Their behavioral analytics profile will only get you so far, but if someone's having a bad day, or getting to know what's going on at home with their families, with their partners, or things that they're interested in outside the game, you need to be invested just as much in that as you are to all this other stuff. And the last part is being true to yourself. If this isn't something that you're good at, if you're not a data person, you're one of those people who hates driving on to facts and figures, then you're probably going to want to delegate and find someone on your staff who can do that. But you have to be true to yourself. And so This last clip, to circle back to Max, this is more based on the relationship that I built with him. Here's a quick interview. He was coming out of a slump in his second season where he had those 35 points, and then he caught fire for a good part around Christmas time, just after Christmas. So here's a quick clip.
Lots of people believe in me, and at one point I didn't really believe in myself, but I think it's crucial that I do, and now I think I'm rolling, and it's great.
How do you get that confidence back, you say, when you're not believing in yourself?
Just skating over the break. I know lots of people might take that time off, but I thought it was important to retune my skills and go out there, and it's helped so far.
What was it, man? What had you thinking that you weren't so confident earlier in the year?
Well, when you go on a stretch of a few games, like not scoring and bounce not going your way, you start to get frustrated. But I think it's important to trust the process. And I read this book that our assistant coach gave to me. It's called Pound the Stone. And it's just about trusting the process, and that really helped a lot too.
And I think a lot of that just comes from knowing what's going on in his life, seeing someone that is struggling and maybe going through some confidence issues. That's never going to show up in a report. It's only going to show up if you truly get to know your people. And so I think through some observation and the relationship that you build with your players, you can do things like that might help. And I guess to summarize, holistic development, as the presentation is called, requires attention in all these areas, and a lot more that aren't mentioned in this presentation. Strength and conditioning, and sports science, rest and recovery, more sports psychology, whether it's breathing techniques or visualization. There's so much more that goes into it. And I just wanted to focus on kind of these 3-4 areas that, as my job as the assistant coach in Erie, what we try to do. And point number 2, something I've reiterated, is data is just data until it's communicated and understood. Only at that point is it actionable information. And then in order to be effective as a coach, you need to tailor the experience to fit your individual players and still make it work within the context of the team. We talk about the individuality and the experience that the players require. Well, as a head coach, you still need to worry about the group, and everyone's needs, certainly individually don't come ahead of the team's needs sometimes. And so you need to make it work and fit within that context. And teamwork is something that you try and emphasize within all this character development and skill development. You hope that you're able to create an environment where your players are bought into that concept. And then lastly, although it's the coach's job to create an environment that fosters development and enables your players to use their talent and get better, it's up to the player to execute and put in the work towards their goals. And at the end of the day, they're responsible for the outcome, and they're the ones who deserve the credit. And I give Max Golod a lot of credit because he invested in himself, he invested in the process, and he used the tools that we were giving him to turn it into tangible development. And so this is a longer video. I'm not going to talk over it. There's no video, so it'll be quiet. But some of the special things that I've seen him do in the last little bit, and it's a joy to watch. So here are just some clips of Max doing his thing, and it's pretty impressive. Anyways, so I'll let it play. And just one more clip here after this goal. Pretty impressive assist that Max had. Can't really teach that. So anyways, that's the presentation. I'm going to leave this information up here. It's my contact information. And then if anyone had any questions for Stathletes or for Core 5 Analytics, I've left their contact information. Dan McKean at Stathletes is my point of contact, and Al Hammernick from Core 5. I'm going to open it to some Q&A if you want to submit some questions, if there are any. And then lastly, just a little plug here. I'd like to remind everybody that there is another presentation on Thursday. TJ Manisterski from Curry College is going to do a presentation on recruiting. And then we're going to have some more exciting announcements in the future. Brad Flynn from the Red Deer Rebels is going to be doing a presentation. And we've got a couple other lined up that those dates aren't set yet. So stay tuned, but I encourage you to sign up for those. I'll include a link to registration when you get your post presentation wrap up. So I'm just looking right now. Is there any way to test your own behavioral analytics from a source you trust, if not the source you use with the Otters? One of the things that I do, actually, like I said, all the coaches do their behavioral analytics assessments. They take a couple hours to complete. We get them back. Everyone gets the opportunity to read theirs. One thing, I was blown away at how accurate my own personal profile was based on my own self-assessment. But I also gave a copy of it to my girlfriend to read, and she was pretty blown away at how accurate it was in some of the areas, both positive and negative. So it's a good tool to use for personal growth as well. What data do you lack that you think you could utilize or you would like to see? That's a tough question. I don't know necessarily that there's anything right now, but this is a continued learning process. For myself, I think you explore and you try and find things that other people are doing, and then you investigate. I know lots of the stuff that has come out from an NHL Coaches Association presentations has brought to light some stuff that that I wouldn't have been curious about otherwise. So I don't think I could specifically say anything that I can think of that I could utilize that we don't have. We're really lucky in Erie. We have a management and ownership that really supports all of our needs that we want. We really don't go wanting. We have all the information we need and then some. And if we do decide we need it, we end up getting it. So we're really lucky in that regard. How do you develop or how do you handle a player development scenario, particularly in regards to Core 5 where a player completely does not mesh with the coaches and our teammates? That's a great question. We've certainly encountered that scenario. I think number one is you do your best to insulate your people. You hope, culture is a buzzword, but you hope that your culture is something that can overcome that. And you try to bring to light certain areas of need for your people. And there's going to be needs that exceed sometimes what you think your role as a hockey coach can be. If it's, it could be attributed to a number of different things. You have to investigate first, why is that occurring? And it could be mental health. It could be a mental health thing. It could be something that's going on that's causing duress with that particular player. And that's one thing, when you do these assessments in the instructions, it is extremely important that you do the assessments when you're in a normal state, that you're not under duress, because it can impact your profile. And we've had that happen where a player has had to retest because the results were so dramatically different year over year. And, sometimes it's error, sometimes it's not. You have to investigate a little bit deeper. And so to bring it back with a player who's not meshing or fitting in, we try and look at all those things and then come up with a plan accordingly. I'll do a few more. Then if there are more questions I don't get to, what I'll do is you can email me, and I'd be happy to jump on a call or correspond back and forth. In the first season, how often are you bringing in Max to show those clips? Are there times you show in-game on the bench, or is it once every week or two? We do basically individual video meetings every week. And the OHL is a weekend league predominantly. So if we play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because we're one of those lucky teams that gets to play 3-on-3 all the time, I'm trying to do my best to work after games in the early morning to get those individual clips. That's part of my responsibility as forward coach. And then on Monday we'd have a day off. Tuesday would be the time that I try to get to most of those individual meetings and try and keep it to 5-6 clips, something with a specific focus that not trying to be too far over the map, have a specific message, and mostly positive reinforcement. But if there are ones that are glaring needs or something that's an area for improvement, I'll show them. Again, it depends on the type of player and their personality. Some guys respond better to that criticism or those negative clips. Some guys don't, and so you have to be careful. But it would be on a weekly basis. And then in game, we've experimented with the iPad on the bench. Sometimes I find it can be a distraction more than anything else. Again, we have it probably more for special teams in game that we're showing clips. But from time to time, like I said, there are guys who seem to respond to that better than the X's and O's on a whiteboard. Get to 2 more here. When do you start the player meetings and analysis, new players versus vets? That's a great question. Every incoming player who is signed to our team does the assessment, and then we redo them every year. And so there are certain areas of the behavioral analytics that are more fluid than others. Some don't change. Your behavior style should not change too much from year to year. That's where you see very little difference. People's behavior is what it is. But some of the other stuff, acumen and emotional intelligence, those are things that can improve or change over time. So we have our players do the assessment at the start of every season. And then the next step is actually meeting with our sports psychologist and with Core 5 to have a review meeting of what the individual profiles say for each person. They can look at their profile, have the opportunity to give feedback, ask questions. And then, that's sort of where the executive summaries come out of. And then, it's up to the coaches really to use as required. So I know, we've tried to look at it from time to time, especially if you're going into a more important meeting with a guy where you're really trying to dive in on something, that you might want to look at the communication do's and don'ts again to make sure that your message really is getting across. And sometimes you want to challenge the player by going off the map of what their profile says, because I think it's dangerous where you narrow your focus so much that they don't learn to learn outside of how they already do, and so you have to try and find that balance. Last question that I'll get to here: how frequently are you reviewing analytical-driven data with players and assessing video? So with the individual player profiles, we get quarterly reports for the individual players. What we try to do is create individual player development profiles that we work on for each guy. So some of the elements of this presentation are similar to those individual profiles. What we try to do is revise them, I think, around Christmas time, so that we can sort of look at after the trade deadline, down the stretch, see where some of that progress has been made. But then from a team standpoint, we get post-game reports, we get 7-game segment reports, and on all those, again, the challenge is parsing it down to manageable bite-sized pieces that we can understand first. So we have a coach's page. The post-game report is 25 pages long, but the coach's page has 12 key metrics that we've identified are most important to us that we review. And that's all I'm going to answer for questions live. But if you do have some, I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. It's a little overwhelming. I probably should have had somebody be an administrator to ask the questions for me. But we're coming up on an hour, so I didn't want to take too much more time than that. I really appreciate you taking the time, everyone here today, to listen, and hopefully there was some value in that for you. And again, if you do have questions, send me an email, and finally register for Thursday's webinar, because I think it'll be really valuable. Thank you for your time, and stay safe out there, everybody.